You say that you want to talk to the American people. Are you prepared to sit down eventually and talk to the American government about the issues that you have just mentioned tonight that separate, that divide you?
Firstly, nothing should prevent dialogue and understanding between two nations, especially between their scholars and thinkers. Right now, I recommend the exchange of professors, writers, scholars, artists, journalists, and tourists. A large number of educated and noble Iranians now reside in the United States as representatives of the Iranian nation. This shows that there is no hostility between the two nations. But the dialogue between civilizations and nations is different from political relations. In regard to political relations, we have to consider the factors which lead to the severance of relations. If someday another situation is to emerge, we must definitely consider the roots and relevant factors and try to eliminate them. Firstly, I have to state that United States foreign policy behavior toward Iran has inflicted damages upon us, but it also had a positive effect. It caused us to mainly focus on our own domestic capabilities and resources to advance our objectives. Now, too, we feel no need for ties with the United States, especially as the modern world is so diverse and plural that we can reach our objectives without any United States assistance. I especially feel that many progressive countries, including the Europeans, are far more advanced in their foreign policy than the United States. We are carrying out our own activities and have no need for political ties with the United States. But the point is that the political behavior of governments should not deprive nations from enjoying the opportunities provided by each side. There is a bulky wall of mistrust between us and the United States administrations, a mistrust rooted in improper behaviors of the American governments. As an example of this type of U.S. behavior, I should refer to admitted involvement of the United States government in the 1953 coup d'etat, which toppled Dr. Mossadegh's national government, immediately followed by a $45 million loan to strengthen an unpopular government installed by foreigners.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. I'm Michael Brooks. We are broadcasting live from Brooklyn, USA, where left is best, as it is everywhere else, with super producer Matt Leck.
Hello.
Chief economist David Griscom.
How's it going?
Super producer David Slavic, roaming the digitosphere in the ever-expanding, ever-global TMBS universe. On this week's program, Jeff Halper. He's the director of Israelis Against Home Demolitions. We're talking about democracy in Israel, Palestine. What's the economic chain of reasoning that allows for the occupation? It's more complicated than certainly defenders of Israel as well as anti-Semitic essentialist explanations allow. It's economic. It reminds us of Achila Bimbe's saying that we are exiting the age of humanism. Jeff Halper is going to break that down for us. Then Briahna Joy Gray. She's politics editor at The Intercept. We're talking about Kamala Harris's record, not good. Stacey Abrams' response to Donald Trump, good. Bernie Sanders' response to Donald Trump, also extremely good. AOC launching the Green New Deal. And of course, in the postgame for patrons, Nancy Pelosi was talking out of the side of her mouth about the Green New Deal, and she needs to go to the gulag. I wonder how figurative that one is. New charges, new sentencing against Lula da Silva in the ongoing, not only political imprisonment of the former president of Brazil, but frankly just human torment of this Brazilian fascist government backed by Wall Street and the United States. We have a shout out for Bob Marley. Would have been his birthday yesterday. One of those cliches. He really was actually that good. Of course, we have a Griscom Economic Minute. We have your calls, discords, and shenanigans in the postgame. I want to thank everybody who came to the TMBS live show. It was a great success. At the Bell House in Brooklyn, for patrons, we're unlocking and showing the full live show this Saturday. We're posting it for TMBS patrons, and next week we'll have an announcement on a related theme. Of course, more to talk about in the pitch, including Woke Bros and what we're doing next week. But first, let's talk about Iraq and Iran and troop levels. Between 1997 and 2003, Mohammad Khatami was the president of Iran, and we played him in that cold open clip. He called for a dialogue of civilizations, and he wanted to open diplomatic relations with the United States. The Bush administration rebuked this. They rebuked it with the axis of evil speech, and they maintained a hawkish and aggressive posture towards the Iranian government. Then Ahmadinejad came into power. He was a much easier foil because of his more rightward policies and aggressive rhetoric. Some of that rhetoric was lies. He never, as an example, said he wanted to wipe Israel off of the map. That's a profound mistranslation. But he did say plenty of awful things, and he did also internally repress. Although now, again, he is quite good on Twitter. So maybe for some irony bros, that makes up for it. But that being said, then under Obama, first there was a incredible ratcheting of sanctions, which the international community went along with, facilitating the rise of President Rouhani. Now, President Rouhani is a very interesting figure because he had more more government credentials, more trust from the supreme leader in Iran, and there was more of a comfort with him making diplomatic overtures than President Khatami. It should be said Ahmadinejad actually attempted to make diplomatic overtures as well, but it was roundly rejected. That led to the Iran agreement, which was not only an incredible accomplishment of the Obama administration and negotiators like Randy Sherman and John Kerry and the entire partnership, including the Europeans, the Russians and Chinese and so forth, but really of modern diplomacy. This is one of the most positive things that happened in the modern world. Donald Trump destroyed that agreement, as almost any other Republican president would have. And we've been thrown into a chaotic and ridiculous situation where the European Union is positively developing an alternative financial mechanism so they can preserve the agreement. China, India, and Russia continue trade with Iran. And the Trump administration in Republican Washington threatens war along with the Gulf states and the far-right Israeli government. Trump's also been talking about getting out of foreign entanglements, including drawing down in Syria, even as he has been, instigating a coup in Venezuela. And then this happened a couple of days ago. This was Donald Trump speaking to Face the Nation, and he had this to say about maintaining troop levels in Iraq.
It was a big mistake to go. One of the greatest mistakes going into the Middle East that our country has ever made. One of the greatest mistakes that we've ever made.
But you want to keep troops there now.
When it was chosen, well, we spent a fortune on building this incredible base. We might as well keep it. And one of the reasons I want to keep it is because I want to be looking a little bit at Iran, because Iran is a real problem.
Whoa, that's news. You're keeping troops in Iraq because you want to be able to strike in Iran?
No, because I want to be able to watch Iran. All I want to do is be able to watch. We have an unbelievable and expensive military base built in Iraq. It's perfectly situated for looking at all over different parts of the troubled Middle East.
I apologize. This is very serious, but it is so hard to not laugh, and certainly not with our president. So there is a neocon brigade that still dominates foreign policy thinking. Donald Trump has adopted this entirely, that wants to threaten, cajole, and catastrophically potentially even have a military conflict with Iran. Caught inside all of this drama between the United States, the Iranians, the Gulf, the Emiratis, and the Israelis are the Iraqis, who we are still occupying their country. They would like us to leave in an orderly fashion, as a matter of fact. And it reminds us that even as we ratchet sanctions against Iran, Trump bloviates and threatens, and this agreement has been thrown into complete turmoil because of the U.S. reneging on it. We are still in Iraq, a place we barely ever talk about anymore. We caused conservatively several 100,000 civilian casualties. That's a very conservative estimate. A refugee crisis. The troops that went there have been killed, maimed, and harmed, and it has affected and come back home into every single aspect of American society. And now it's an afterthought in conversations, an afterthought in Trump's ridiculous assertions about a base. He is right, Iran isn't a kindergarten. I don't think most places, most nation states are kindergartens, but it is a place that demonstrably we can do, and most countries do, diplomacy with. This was profoundly reckless to begin with, and with John Bolton hovering around and Mike Pompeo in the helm, it could get a lot worse. People paint a lot of scare scenarios with Russia as an example. That's fine. We should keep an eye on that dynamic. But the appetite for war with Iran is potentially the most dangerous current in the world, and it's synchronized in a far-right, reckless leadership that spans the Gulf, the United States, and Israel. Guys, we're running a little tight, but if you have something, I know Griscom always wants to get his Iran points in. Griscom would like to be very connected with the Iranian community, so please go ahead. You have to make sure your mic is in place before you suck up to the Farsis.
No, I just wanted to make a quick point about how, the sanctions on Iran not only have had a very serious human cost in Iran itself, but it also very much affects Iraqis.
Right.
Something that's come up a lot recently is that Iraq, don't forget, Iran's their neighbor, right? They import a lot of energy from Iran. And because of U.S. sanctions, they're no longer able to do that. Actually, like predominantly, the electricity used in Iraq comes from Iranian sources. So they have to ask permission from the United States to be able to keep, their cities, lighted. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous when you think about it. So when we are paying attention to all these other things in the world, we really also need to be sure that we're not forgetting what's going on in Iraq with continued, American presence there.
Definitely, 100%. And we will continue, and there's also some illicit histories focusing on Iraq, but also Pakistan and Afghanistan in the works. These forgotten, these are conflicts that have lasted longer than World War II, and they barely even register. But they certainly register for Iraqis and Afghanis and the troops there. Let's get to the shout-out. When you're ready, the great DJ shout-out. Just a genius of musical production. Ably assisted by the great broadcaster Alex Jones.
It was great hearing this over the speakers at the live show.
Yeah, that was so formidable. Shout out goes to Bob Marley. He would have been 74 years old yesterday. Some people really are as good as everybody hypes them up to be. Of course, I'm an unapologetic reggae lover, not just Bob Marley, but Garnet Silk and now Chronix, but also Vibes, also Buju, a lot of people. Let's play a little bit of this in the background. This is a performance from Germany in Dortmund, Germany, of Natural Mystic, which is my favorite Bob Marley song. We did an illicit history on the gang warfares in Jamaica in the 70s between Michael Manley and Edward Seaga, between People's National Party and the Jamaica Labour Party, in the attempted assassination of Bob Marley. What was the role of the CIA in these various things? What's the role of the sort of cocaine networks that grew up in the 1980s, paralleling Reagan, and emanating out of the relationship with Seaga? But also the way that Bob Marley was really this the ultimate non-aligned figure, and truly radical, and truly a voice for something else in the world, something else in politics. There's a reason that you do see his image from everywhere, from Germany, in fact, to even occupied Tibet. This is an incredibly important figure. If you aren't, listen to and enjoy him, and expand the catalog. Not just legend, I guess is my point. Shout out to Bob Marley. And tell us your favorite Bob Marley songs on Discord and Twitter. Natural Mystic was all I could listen to after Trump got elected for about 4 days. Many more will have to suffer. Many more will have to die. Don't ask me why. Things are not the way they used to be. As a Natural Mystic.
Perfect.
Yeah, it worked too well. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about becoming a patron of the Michael Brooks Show, and then Jeff Halper is going to get into the seat. He's here in studio. We have 2 in-studio guests and a guest, a patron, a genius, a friend of the show. Sometimes we let patrons come in here and watch what we're doing off the record. Well, informally off the record. Informally on the record. Become a patron of the Michael Brooks Show today. You got 2-to-1 extra content. You got illicit histories on Brazil, Iran, Jamaica, South Africa, primers in political theory, U.S. political history. This Sunday, Zach Carter and I talk about why Howard Schultz's campaign is a desperate, emotional, bizarre attempt of the oligarchs to revive the 1990s. And we explain it through political economy. You get 2-to-1 extra content in the post game. We have a lot of fun. We do the gulag. We take your calls. We take your Discord questions. We play clips. We enjoy ourselves. We're well on our way to 2,000 patrons. I think we will cross that this month, and that, of course, is the next goal for sustaining things, and a little bit of expansion. There's going to be something actually that I think we'll announce soon that will be specifically for Comrade and above, 21 and above patrons, in addition to the phone calls that we're working on. There was a little bit, Patreon was really, there was a lot of problems this month in terms of declined charges. And I know people were contacting me and telling me that, they were having trouble with their cards, and it was extremely frustrating. I apologize. I don't understand why this always seems to be a problem every month. The best I can do is, just keep trying, and if need be, set up a new account. I do apologize for the inconvenience, but, it's the way we're doing things now and the way we sustain everything. Become a patron today. Let's get to that 2,000 number. We continue, and you can help us with figuring out monetizing YouTube. Quite bizarre. I mean, at this point, we're not even... I don't even want to say we've crossed the metrics anymore. I mean, that happened when the first few weeks of the channel going up. And the views are high, so it's bizarre. The best way to support and sustain everything is becoming a patron at patreon.com/TMBS. If you want to help in addition, and just hit us on the PayPal link, and that helps sustain the YouTube page, which is obviously good for promoting the show, but also we want to be a presence on YouTube. The YouTube is dominated by the right, and there's a lot of good people on the left, but we need as many as possible. And then, of course, I think there's, the distinct sort of global, Marxist, dickish. No, I'm just kidding. The global, the specific things that we provide. We appreciate all of you so much. Become a patron today, patreon.com/TMBS. We're going to take a brief break, and then we'll come back with Jeff Halper of Israelis Against Home Demolitions. We'll talk for about 20-25 minutes. And this is a really important conversation. You're going to want to tune in, and you're going to want to act. We'll be right back. And we're about to meet basically the just intellectual, moral, every way opposite of Dave Rubin, Jeff Halper. He is the head of Israelis Against Home Demolitions.
The Israeli Committee
Against House
Demolitions.
The Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. I apologize. Jeff, you've been working on a variety of issues, both for democracy and justice in Israel and Palestine, but you also have an analysis that goes deeper than most of the sort of conversations that we have about Israel-Palestine, in my estimation. But how did you, you live in Israel. Yes. You're, Jewish gentleman. You're mishpucha, as I'm half of, and Phil is all of. This is a couple of goyim right here, so we can...
In Israel.
Your uncle converted and lived in Israel?
Yeah, my uncle is
he should be on a watch list.
Looking guy who converted to Judaism, very rare thing.
He should. What did you say? He was a what guy?
He's a very waspy looking guy
right,
who converted to Judaism.
Yeah, I know. I've heard that they are actually really funny stories. That's good post game content. How did you end up in Israel? How did this Israel story begin? And then how did you find yourself in the peace movement?
Well, I grew up in northern Minnesota.
Right.
a little town in northern Minnesota, and I was very active in the 60s.
Okay.
You know, civil rights movement, anti-war movement, Chicago in 68, all of that. I was the class of 68.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And when the 60s collapsed, we had Nixon and everything else. There was nothing for me in this country. I felt everything was, maybe this is a Midwestern reaction. Had I grown up in New York, it might have been different, where there's a little more substance. But in the Midwest,
Oh, there's no substance here. Trust me.
all right. Well, even the Midwest, the Midwest is
I
flatter.
love it, but New York is trash. Yeah, I mean,
Well, the Midwest
all
is
love,
flatter.
but trash. Yeah.
So if you want, you know,
Yeah.
I still want to be involved, but I wanted to be in our language in those days to move to another front, a more meaningful front of the revolution.
Right.
And so I had to go somewhere if I wanted to get out where I could be politically active. And Israel, I mean, for reasons that aren't good, because as a Jew, I had the right to go to Israel automatically, whereas Palestinians are kind of excluded from the country automatically.
Right.
Nevertheless, I used that privilege to move there. So from the very beginning, I was involved in the Israeli peace movement. I met my wife in the new Israeli New Left in those days, and I've been involved for 45 years now.
So that's very interesting to me. So you didn't, because I think some people, and I think particularly, you know, generationally, I'm very mindful of this. Some people definitely had a perception, I think, in the 60s and 70s, who had really good politics, that, you know, obviously the Jews are incredibly, to say the least, historically repressed and literally genocided people. And there's an image of Israel of, you know, oh, well, it's kibbutz socialism and we're building something new. And some people had that vision. That was a flawed vision, but did you went in already with a sense of some of the problems in the Israeli project?
Yeah, I mean, my story isn't one of a rosy-eyed Zionist that goes in and gets disillusioned and finds his way to the left. I knew there was occupation. I knew Palestinians. I knew Zionism and so on. I do have to admit that, you know, part of the 60s was a kind of identity politics.
Right.
Where, you know, you had Alex Haley's roots and you had the Native American movement and you had, you know, Cesar Chavez and so on. So there was a going back to roots, and I'm not religious in any way, and the Jewish community didn't offer very much. And so in a way there was a certain attraction to Israel, but also Israel was a different country in those days. It had a socialist government.
Right.
And nobody thought that the occupation was going to last. So in a sense, going into a new country with some promise, but with some fundamental problems, being committed to trying to resolve those problems, finding a common denominator with the Palestinians, it made sense in those days. I mean, it's not like in Israel today, where I think someone like me would never even visit, let alone go move there.
How did I will just say parenthetically, you know, I was in Jerusalem for under a week, and I also spent some time in the West Bank. But I would just say, and this is even, I would say, even well short of a radical critique, for people in the United States who are part of the kind of, I would just even say, modern Democratic Party, with their expectation sets, their correct expectation sets about certain sort of basic anti-racism, you would be shocked by spending time in Israel, even just by that sort of very limited metric. I mean, it really is a radically different thing. So can you, though, trace for us, because I think it's actually, I like that, though, because, okay, on one hand, there's this rosy-eyed history, and some people even hold this other narrative that Israel was this great, incredible thing, and then it was corrupted by Likud and Netanyahu, and of course that isn't true. No. But then conversely, the other narrative that Israel was always just, all it ever is was just the settler right-wing thing. Yeah. It was a settler thing, but there was complexities to, you know, a labor socialist government, then the rise of the sort of neoliberals, then you even have Ehud Barak in a third way, and then a forerunner of this sort of resurgent far right that we see across the Western Hemisphere, starting when Netanyahu came back to power in 2008. So can you talk to us just about those kind of big periods of broader Israeli political history that you have seen?
Well, yes and no. Because, in fact, I mean, if you look at the last 125 years of Zionism, it was a settler colonial movement.
That's objectively true.
I mean, you can't.
Yes.
You can't get away
objectively
from
true.
that.
Right.
And they were more liberal settler colonialists, and they were more conservative, more religious, and more secular. But that was, in other words, the Zionist movement, that was a left socialist nationalist movement in the turn of the 20th century, came to the country with the intention of taking it over, of Judaizing the country. In other words, transforming an Arab country into a Jewish country, transforming Palestine into the land of Israel. And that was the agenda. So in a sense, whether you were on the right or on the left, you had that same political logic. It was the left, you might say, the Labor Party that founded the State of Israel. It was them that did the ethnic cleansing of 1948, that destroyed all the Palestinian villages, drove half the Palestinians out. It was the Labor Party that did the
Nakba for people. I think a lot of people will know, but explain
the Nakba is the Arab term for what happened in 1948. We call it the War of Independence in Israel. They call it the Nakba, which means the catastrophe. And in 1948, there was a concerted campaign to ethnically cleanse the country, because the country had been partitioned into two states by the UN, a Jewish state and an Arab state. But the Jews were only a third of the population, were newcomers to the country, and yet the UN gave them 56% of the land. And the Palestinian indigenous population only got 42%. So the Palestinians didn't agree. And no colonized people would agree.
No colonized people agree, right?
That 56% of their country would be given to somebody else, and the UN had no authority to give it to the Jews. And there was a war, and in the war, Israel had a concerted campaign of driving the Palestinians out. So about 750,000 Palestinians were driven out of the country. And then, subsequent to that, not in the heat of battle, but after, for 20 years after, Israel systematically destroyed more than 600 entire Palestinian villages, towns, and urban areas in order to, first of all, to take their land, of course, but to prevent the refugees from coming back. So from the very beginning, this was a unilateral process.
Right.
And basically 1967, which was also the Labor Party, was simply the completion of the last stage of the Judaization of the country, where they took the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. So the idea of two states, or the idea that these are occupied territories that someday we can negotiate and would become a Palestinian state, was never in the works. It was not part of the logic. The whole logic of the settler colonial movement was unilateral, to take the entire country and the indigenous population, who are the Palestinians. Until today in Israel, we don't even use the word Palestinian, because that gives too much distinctiveness and legitimacy to a collective we don't recognize. We talk about Arabs in a very general way.
Right.
So that the idea is that the Arabs, the indigenous, have no rights. They have no collective existence. And it's our country exclusively. And so, in a sense, whether it's the right wing or the left wing, Mark Twain grew up on a farm, and he used to say, "My mother was a liberal. She drowned the kittens like everybody else, but she'd warm the water first."
Oh.
So in a sense, the Labor Party, warmed the water and talks two states and talks nice and human rights. But in fact, it's actually the Labor Party that conquered the country, that displaced the Palestinians, that conquered the occupied territories, that never agreed to a two-state, because Labor was in power during the Oslo peace process. It's Labor that's demolished 55,000 Palestinian homes. It's Labor that built the wall. Likud and Sharon, who was then prime minister, was against building the apartheid wall. It was Labor. So Labor is actually much more responsible for the situation we have today than the Likud.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, I think it was probably oversold in the United States, but I think of who is it, Rivlin? The Likud,
the president of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things he says about just sort of general civility and polity across is
in a country like Israel, that comes out radical.
It sounds radical, and it sounds well to the left of anything that any labor politician says. And even when he made sure to appear with Palestinian children and say, "Hey, they're your neighbors. You treat them with respect." I mean, this is the type of thing that culturally signifying is well to the left in Israel, and he is in fact the leader of Likud, but a different faction of Likud that has some sense of a broader civic space,
but with no political clout whatsoever.
No political clout whatsoever. So what I want to go to talk about the one state, which relates to it. But first, how did the activism that you had get so specific to home demolition?
Well,
and also explain the home demolition policy.
Right. We were, look, like the Palestinians, the Israeli peace movement, the left, was invested in the Oslo peace process. The sides were meeting.
Which began in the 90s.
It began in 1993, lasted for 7 years. And we had hoped that, the sides are meeting and they're negotiating, something would come out. We were doubtful, but there was that hope. And then Rabin was assassinated, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995. Netanyahu, who ran against the Oslo peace process, was elected a few months later in early 1996. And we understood that the Oslo peace process was a sham. It's never going to lead to anything. And in fact, the occupation was reasserting itself. Israel was going back. I mean, Israel never stopped demolishing homes. House demolitions that we focus on is really a part of the ethnic cleansing, and it goes on till this moment. So as we, in the left, decided we had to re-engage with resisting the occupation that was coming back in force, we advised with our Palestinian colleagues, what issue should we really focus on that would kind of get to the meat of the oppression and the repression? And the issue of house demolitions came up all the time. This is one of the most painful parts of the occupation, where Israel, not for security reasons, these are not houses of terrorists, which would be the knee-jerk reaction. These are normal people that want to build homes on their own land. Israel has simply frozen Palestinian building in 1967, 50 years ago. So for 50 years, you have kids, your kids have kids, and they have kids, and you want to live somewhere and start a family. Palestinians have not been allowed to build homes for the last 50 years. And when they do, of course, because you have to live somewhere, your homes are demolished. Again, 55,000 Palestinian homes only in the occupied territory since 1967. That's on the backdrop of another 60,000 that were demolished in the Nakba in 1947, 48, and after, and thousands more inside Israel until today. Right. So we're talking about really a policy of either inducing emigration of Palestinians, if you don't have a home, or confining them to little tiny islands in the country, which is a kind of an apartheid. Right. So it really is an apartheid instrument.
Right. Actually, before I get to one state, I want to get to this other piece of your work, and correct me if I'm reading it wrong, but one of the things I really like is a part of me really shies away from, and I'm not drawing, I'm not drawing a false equivalency here. One needs to oppose the occupation, period, and the siege on Gaza and everything else. But there's a way in which the conversation about Israel-Palestine becomes very specialized, I think, in a way that robs us of understanding how it fits into a bigger supply chain and a bigger, basically just sort of Western colonial system and a bigger securitization of the world. And so, on one hand, there's, obviously, like some people in my family, which is, it's Israel and we have an identity and we can do, we just need to do what we do, which is actually some of the initial critiques I have of identity politics and certain manifestations arise from the tremendous misuse of identity politics in the defense of Israeli apartheid. Then, conversely, I think there are some people who have, it's inevitable that at times there's going to be, if not outright anti-Semitism, shades of anti-Semitism, and a conspiratorial understanding of this. But you've talked about the Israeli government and the occupation and Israelization as really, of course, in and of itself, a horrible, distinct crime, but also a forerunner, almost a horrifying infomercial of a world where Western governments are securitizing borders, where they're policing refugees, where they're detaining...
Not only Western
all governments, pardon me. Explain that more sort of security economic supply chain way of understanding the Israeli occupation and how it fits into the bigger picture.
Well, I wrote a book called War Against the People, in which I place really the Israeli, Israel over Palestine is a microcosm of the global north over the global south.
Right. That's why I was saying Western.
And but we all live in a global capitalist economy.
Right.
I mean, we're all living in the same system, whether you're Western or not Western,
Right.
or Chinese or whatever.
Because for what it's worth, I mean, in the West, in that sense, I realize, it is sloppy because I mean, Dubai is Western.
I would
in
talk
that
about
sense.
capitalist.
Capital,
And
I love it.
everybody's
That's better.
in one way or another.
Capital,
in the capitalist
capital
system.
domination, and
Whether it's
exploitation.
state capitalism like China or corporate capitalism like here.
Yes.
The point is that in this capitalist system, especially the neoliberal system of the last 50 years, it's closing down more and more. More and more people are excluded. 80% of humanity lives on less than $10 a day. And even, the global south is extending into the global north. You have the Occupy movement here because young children, middle-class kids of the global north are also being excluded. There's no more job security. They can't get housing. They have these huge loans. So they're being excluded. So as the system closes down all over the world, and resources are being robbed by corporations. So wars today are resource wars. They're not wars of battles and tanks and ideologies and countries. They're wars against the people. Whether people in the global south that you want to rob and repress because they resist, that's counterinsurgency, or people at home, like middle-class kids or minority kids or immigrants or poor people that also resist being marginalized and impoverished. War against the people.
Ferguson, Occupy.
You can go on and on. I mean,
but just to
every
fill
day.
in. Right.
So
Okay.
that wars today are wars against the people. They're fought by police forces and security forces. And the police forces are being militarized. And if you think about it, your militaries are being policified. They're not fighting a war in Afghanistan and Iraq and Africa and so on. They're policing.
Right.
So that all these things are coming together. And in a war against the people, the United States doesn't have the weaponry and tactics because your weapons that the Pentagon develops are geared for fighting the Soviet Union, not for fighting people in Kabul or Brooklyn.
Right.
And Europe hasn't fought colonial wars for decades. So the go-to country, that's what I'm trying to get at, for war against the people is Israel. Because Israel has been fighting a war against the Palestinian people for 125 years. It has an occupied territory that you have to look at as a resource, as a laboratory for testing and perfecting weapons, security systems, surveillance systems, tactics of population control, technologies of repression that are exported. So the point is the Palestinians are the guinea pigs. But you, in the United States, because Israel is exporting to the United States and all over the world, Israel is the sixth largest arms exporter. So in a sense, you're the end user. You're at the receiving end of the military and policing technologies that are simply perfected on the Palestinians. So it's what I call global Palestine. Right. And we have to understand, and in a sense, it's a great window into understanding how capitalism is enforced. And Israel is really in many, I'm not saying it's the only enforcer, obviously, but Israel really has the model of enforcement and the technologies for it. And even the concept of a security state that it's trying to peddle, that really finds a ready market in this country and all over the world. So Israel really delivers for you. It helps you to repress your own populations. Israel is now being sued by the Khashoggi family of the journalist that was killed in Istanbul because the Israelis sold the eavesdropping material to the Saudi government. Right. So whether you want to repress your own people or whether you're a corporation and a corporate government that wants to repress people in general for the interests of global capitalism, Israel becomes the go-to country. So in a sense, there's a global dimension to this conflict, so-called, to the occupation that I think we should all be aware of.
Yeah, this reminds me, I keep thinking, and I'll send it to you if you haven't read it yet, but Achille Mbembe, who's a Cameroonian philosopher, wrote a piece in 2016 called The Age of Humanism is Coming to an End, I believe. And he, in a similar way, he said, basically, Gaza is the microcosm of everything that's happening right now.
That's right. And the point, that's right. And the point that I try to make is that the Gazans, again, are simply the guinea pigs.
Yeah.
So what I try to say to people is, you should be concerned about Palestinians because they're Palestinians that are suffering for human rights and so on.
Right.
But in a sense, as here in New York or the U.S., as your police forces and security forces are being Israelized,
Yeah.
The Jewish Voice for Peace organization has a campaign called Deadly Exchange that's trying to document the Israeli training of American police and arming of American police. As your security forces are being Israelized, you are being Palestinianized, you the people.
Right.
And so, in a sense, there's a very real connection between the people on the receiving end in Gaza and the same people on the receiving end of the same weapons and tactics in New York City.
Right. So, and also ideologically too. There's an ideological export and cross-pollination as well.
Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, Israel is very good at Hasbara, at PR, and so that's, that becomes part of, especially Hasbara of the global capitalist system is around the term security.
Yes. Right.
Because security is kind of a neutral term. Of course I want security, and of course I want my government to give it to me. So it becomes a form of self-pacification, where you don't see the political interests involved in pacifying you, in getting you to conform, in repressing you, and so on, but you simply see it as security, and so you willingly accept it. So to the degree that Israel gets people to accept occupation as something somehow normal, and of course we're defending against occupation because the people of the Palestinians are terrorists, and you make a kind of common sense. Israel is helping, I think, the global elites to package repression as a form of neutral security that, of course, we all
Well, how many people after the Snowden revelation said, hey, if you're doing nothing wrong, there's no problem?
Exactly.
Versus looking at the systemic problem of that type of surveillance. Exactly. There's two more things I want to touch on with you. So I want to just say, and again, and I like in your work, I mean, of course, there's anti-Semitism in the world, just as there's racism and every other poisonous ism. And I want to bring in the Palestinian political factions, not because, I'm not going to do some silly, but what about Hamas question. But I do want to know how concretely. So when I talk about this, I say, look, here's the reality. The West Bank Palestinian leadership, which are essentially Israeli security subcontractors, are the only political faction that exists right now who have any actual, quote-unquote, power in that they're nominally in charge of the West Bank, but not really. They're the only faction that is totally on board with the 90s Oslo process. They're actually the only ones committed to it. So if you want to believe in that Oslo liberal vision, Mahmoud Abbas should be your guy. That's right. 100%. Hamas has actually significantly prevaricated on what their position on two states is. They've absolutely committed atrocities. And frankly, they mostly have their hands full trying to manage an open-air prison where medicine can't get into. Is that a decent frame? I guess what I'm saying is I don't want to, look,
idealize the Palestinians.
I'm not going to idealize anybody, and also by the same token, look, in a broad sense, I'm not going to, here's how I see it. Look, I'm not going to pass judgment on how somebody fights their liberation struggle generally. Conversely, if we're going to have values and norms, there's certain tactics and things that just need to be categorically opposed and ruled out, whether they're from the Israelis or Hamas. But that being said, the fundamental point to me is not that I object to criticizing Hamas. I object to any question that has a starting point that we're talking about any type of equivalent power. That, to me, is the enormous dishonesty of that question.
No, there's no symmetry.
Right.
That's why I don't like to use the word conflict.
Right.
The Arab-Israeli conflict.
Right.
Because that assumes both sides.
Right.
We have to negotiate. Whereas settler colonialism is a unilateral process. Israel is not negotiating with the Palestinians, whether it's Abu Mazen or Hamas or anybody.
Right.
And so that we have to, and of course Israel has managed to demonize the Palestinian resistance as terrorism. And of course, the way terrorism is used, it's only applied to non-state actors, not to states. So Israel kills many more civilians and demolishes homes and conquers and everything. than Hamas or any so-called terrorist group. But the word terrorism only sticks to a non-state actor that makes them illegitimate. What we have to do is look at Hamas's actions as resistance. And, in international law, a colonized people has a right to armed resistance.
That being said, but we could still, like using the IRA as an example. So there's no doubt that the IRA needed to be brought into negotiations that led to Good Friday, that approved the situation in Ireland, and they had absolutely the right to resist and every other right that we're talking about. And again, we could still say, hey, you shouldn't have, kneecapped people or planted a bomb in a shopping mall. So that's, I'm trying to make it easier.
Although Israel is never held accountable for doing that.
Well, that goes without
Israel has a whole campaign of what's called targeted assassinations that the U.S. has adopted in different parts of the world. It's routinized, which is illegal in international law, extrajudicial killings. The point is that Hamas is a political organization that's only been demonized by the United States and Israel as a terrorist group. It's denied the political aspects. And Hamas actually agreed to the two-state idea. Right. Just like in 2006, all the factions of the Palestinians, from the left to the right, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad, convened in prison, because that's where the leadership is. And they came up with what's called the prisoner's document that said all the factions agreed that if Israel would generally give up all the occupied territories, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, which is only 22% of the country, then they would all agree to a peace agreement
for an actual continuous two states within 67 lines. So, but my only point being is that I think it's
just what I'm saying is that Hamas has actually pursued a moderate political line. But in order to avoid all that, Israel has demonized it as an extremist terrorist group.
And I think, they have since they came to power in Gaza, right? Since 2006.
Yeah, I mean, they came to power in an election.
Yeah, they won.
That the United States and Israel unilaterally declared was not legitimate, even though Jimmy Carter was there and said it was a legitimate election.
Right. And we can condemn actions and tactics categorically from anyone as distinct from political delegitimization, because again, let's face facts here. If you actually generate a solution to this crisis, it's going to involve, like every other diplomatic process, people who essentially have blood on their hands are going to be part of it. Like Thabo Mbeki says, justice or peace. We opt for peace. He made this point with regards to apartheid. He said, I certainly didn't want the ICC to come in and arrest apartheid leaders. I needed to negotiate with them to end this thing. So the same principle applies. Go talk about one state solution in the final couple minutes. It appeals to me ideologically. I remember I read Tony Judd in the New York Review of Books in college, and I said to him, it was like, look, what do I believe in? I believe in a state where everybody, regardless of the background and who they are, has total cultural and individual autonomy, and all is protected under a shared civic law. How could I not support that in the Middle East?
That's right. So what we have today in Israel is the two-state solution is gone. Actually, it never existed. I mean, but it's certainly, you can make the case that with the collapse of Oslo, for the last 25 years, it's been gone. So for 25 years, we've been floundering, and Israel has simply strengthened its occupation to a degree that today there already is one state.
Right.
Between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, there's only one effective government.
Right.
There's only one army, obviously. There's only one set of borders. In other words, you can't get into the country from any direction without going through Israeli border controls. There's only one currency. There's only one infrastructure. There's only one legal system. So by any measure, this is already one country that Israel created, but it's an apartheid state because you have separate legal regimes for different populations under the same government. So it's like apartheid. It is apartheid. So what we're saying is, okay, it's a fairly stark set of options. The two-state solution that we accepted in the peace camp and the Palestinians accepted is gone or never was. So let's stop talking about it because it's gone. The option, what Israel wants, is apartheid. One country with apartheid that I think all your listeners won't accept. I don't think anybody today would accept apartheid.
Our viewers too,
and your viewers, so that remains. So the third option is to say this: okay, Israel, you created one state. We go along with that. We'll go with the flow. Fine, one state, but it can't be an apartheid regime. Right. It has to be a democratic state of equal rights for all its citizens. Now, why that should be such a shocking idea for Americans or people in the West, the democracy. Right. That is exactly the way out. It's simple, it cuts through things, and in fact, it would work. Because, it's funny to say this.
Explain how it would work, because I know so many people who are right there, and they still have this little voice. And I say to them, I said, look, look at the transition. Not that South Africa doesn't have plenty of problems, but they generated a full democracy. There's no pogroms. There's no, people participate in politics.
Terrorists, and they predicted
all
bloodbath.
The same stuff.
These are all colonial terms.
Right.
In fact, it sounds funny to say this with occupation and demolitions and repression and wars, but in fact, the country that I'm talking about between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River actually functions not badly today. 20% of Israeli citizens are Palestinians. Right. There's never been intifadas inside Israel. They're second-class citizens, but they're well integrated in that sense. And even in the occupied territory, before Israel closed the occupied territories almost 30 years ago, so Palestinians don't have access to the Israeli economy anymore and impoverished them. 130,000 Palestinians every day would come into Israel to work. They spoke Hebrew. The last generation of Palestinians was much more integrated into Israel than their kids are, because their kids have been locked out of Israel for the last 30 years. So that, in fact, we had, and we have to some degree, a functioning country. It's true, there's fighting, but a lot of the fighting, like in Gaza, is actually initiated by...
is that Netanyahu?
Take off my coat. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay. It's all right.
I didn't think it was going to ring.
It's all right.
I thought the ring was off. And the point I'm trying to make is that the actually the violence, if you want to call it that, or the warfare, has been initiated by Israel. Mm-hmm. The wars, the occupation, the closure of Gaza into like a prison.
Right. I just want to be really clear that when we call Gaza an open air prison, in the United States, this is still
an open air prison.
First of all, that's an objective fact, and secondly, David Cameron, the former British Prime Minister, called it that. So outside of the United States, there is no conversation in mainstream politics about what this is. This is a 2 + 2 = 4 statement.
Right. But the bottom line, all I want to say is that this idea that somehow we're enemies, we'll never live together, we'll kill each other, the Palestinians will kill the Jews, simply isn't true. I think these two peoples actually, there's been a lot of research. Our economies are very complementary. Palestinians have a very vibrant high-tech economy. Yeah. They're into telecommunications. It's repressed, but it's there. There are more, if you take all the Palestinians in the world and all the Israelis in the world, there are more Palestinians in universities today. They're a highly educated population. They have a tremendously wealthy, educated diaspora behind them, that the blacks in South Africa didn't have. So they have resources, and they have an interest. What we're trying to do with the one-state idea is to say, let's build a country that's win-win. We're not excluding anybody. We're not destroying anything. We're transforming an apartheid regime into a democratic country in which it's good for everybody. So if you're an Israeli, you can continue to speak Hebrew. Nobody's going to close the Hebrew University. You can live in Hebron if you want to, but the country will be integrated and people will be equal. And in that kind of a situation, the economy will grow, refugees will come back. In that kind of a situation, there's no motivation for bloodshed or one community to attack the other community. It's a win-win for everybody.
Right. And I remember a professor of mine, one of my IR professors, he said, if you look at car theft rings in Israel, Palestine, you could see that even in the worst of times, Israelis and Palestinians can work really well together.
Criminals work very well together.
Yeah, criminals know what they're doing. How can people help and get involved if they're interested, Jeff Halper?
Well, this is a Palestinian-led movement. We call it the One Democratic State Campaign. for a single state. It's Palestinians and Israelis, but led, of course, by Palestinians. And we have a Facebook page right now, One Democratic State Campaign. We're working on a website. We're going to launch this movement probably in April. So we're not all set up yet. We've been spending the last 2 years formulating a program, a 10-point program that I think is a very good program, which you can find on the Facebook page. And then, people can contact me or contact us through the Facebook page. We have an email, which is contact@onedemocraticstate.org. And we're at the ground level right now. So people want to get involved. This is
good
the
ground up, not the Howard Schultz one. The good one. Jeffrey Halper.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. All right. I guess we'll take a brief break, and then we will come back. David Griscom has to do his segment, and then the great Briahna Joy Gray returns. Let's take a brief break. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. David, what are you doing here?
Just hanging out.
Get back to your spot.
Took advantage of
Jesus
some camera
Christ.
malfunctions.
Yeah.
I moved my way up.
I see what you did. You sabotaged the whole tech system. So you can have a seating upgrade.
That's why I was in here last night late.
I have actually very little doubt.
By the way, we have Griscom's logo up. Do we know who made that?
I'll have to look that up, but it's a great logo.
We need to know who made Griscom's logo.
It was wonderful. I'll
really
tweet it
good.
out later because they did a wonderful job with it.
Check out Griscom's, and we'll use it again in the future.
We will use it again in the future.
Certainly.
Well, David, certainly I don't like you sitting so close. I know that Richard Wolff, I'm sure, is probably even more pissed than he usually is, but nonetheless. Now you're literally gonna give the head cock to Richard Wolff,
dude. I'm ready.
He's coming back in April. He's gonna smack your face. He already did. I thought you would have gotten a little humbled the last time.
It is very, very disturbing.
It's not my blood. Yeah, I wanted to talk.
Wait. Hold on. Yeah, Matt's giving you drops. Just calm down, young man. We'll get to you in a second. We're doing a little bit of shtick first.
It is very, very disturbing when I hear the millionaire or billionaire word. And I told him to stop it. Knock it off.
Stop it. David Griscom, hit us with the economic minute. The gem.
Gem.
Economic minute.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about something that's been going on for the past couple of months with local governments and state governments trying to fight back against another one of these big Silicon Valley companies. This time it's Airbnb. So recently, a federal judge actually blocked a New York City law that sought to prevent landlords and the rich from turning apartments into de facto hotels.
Right.
This law was passed last summer. Airbnb sued them, claiming the rule was unconstitutional, basically saying that they were infringing on people's privacy rights. Now, this is happening all across the country. Just this week in Hawaii,
it's an innovative use of a privacy argument.
Yeah, exactly. Well, of course. I mean, they're they're looking for any kind of cynical argument they can make, and they're doing it in a lot of places because more and more cities are starting to put regulations on it. So in Hawaii, they've recognized that there's probably $41 million in unpaid taxes that have been missed due to the fact that people are avoiding their taxes on Airbnb because it's kind of a sneaky way to get around property rules and hotel rules. And these fights are no small issue, especially because rents have become so unaffordable for many people. The illegal usage of these properties has really serious effects on housing affordability. Not only because it creates a shortage of units, it really exacerbates the contradiction between use value and exchange value for people. So remember, we've talked about this before, but the use value, it's very simple. I mean, you use a house to live in, to, reproduce your life, to fall in love, to watch movies.
I was going to say procreate as a joke, and you actually went there. All right, cool.
Look, these are all important parts of life.
Watch football, have sex.
That's a very important part of life.
Yep.
And then there's the exchange value, which is what your landlord is really interested in.
Right.
How much rent they can extract from the property, how much the property can be sold for, and the potential value they can get for leveraging the apartment. Now, Airbnb really exacerbates that because while an apartment may be zoned for residential use, they can make a lot of money putting it on Airbnb. Just to use made-up numbers, right? In New York City, let's say you have an apartment that would typically rent for $2,000 a month, right? Which is honestly a steal, depending.
I was going to say, where are you living in New York?
And let's also use low numbers too, and say they put it on Airbnb for $100 a night, which is also very low for New York City. they're making $3,000 a month basically on Airbnb rentals, which is a huge difference. And there's a reason that Airbnb really does drive up prices, because people can come into it in a speculative way, and then they can rent it out on Airbnb and they can make a lot of money. And it's important to understand that while Airbnb might be cheap for people like us to use over a weekend, it really has negative effects on communities. An EPI study that came out, which is sort of the crux of this piece, is very important because it explains a lot of these numbers. So Airbnb might be cheaper for your travel expenses, but travel expenses are not a major part of the American person's budget. Housing costs are a much bigger part of the typical person's budget. So, you know, you talk about what's been going on even just in New York City. In the past 2 years, there has been a $400 annual increase across the board in New York City due to Airbnb markets. Airbnb does not increase the amount of travel into an area. It just moves visitors from hotels to Airbnbs. So it doesn't really have a big value for tourism for the local community. And because there's a higher renter cost for most people in the community and a loss of tax revenue, it's no small matter in small towns, especially tourist cities. You know, these are major issues that we're fighting about. Airbnb can significantly increases the wealth of those who own property. And as we know, one thing about this country, that's rich people. 20% of Americans own 90% of non-primary housing wealth. So basically the property values of 90% of American housing, it goes to the top 20%. And Airbnb is a very great way for people to make a lot of money on the housing wealth that they already have. So the profits and the value and the benefit from Airbnb overwhelmingly skew to the top. And they especially skew to white households, which hold 86% of this type of wealth. You know, and there's a correlation between increased Airbnb units in an area or neighborhood and increases in rental prices from year to year. So it's important to recognize that this is something that very much is increasing the cost of living for many people. It's overwhelmingly benefiting the rich, and we should be very vigilant and make sure that Airbnb is not able to get away with these kind of bogus legal arguments that they're trying to make to subvert local communities that are basically just trying to make sure that everybody has the ability to live. Because one thing about housing is you need it no matter what. You don't have the option of not renting or not living somewhere. So people are forced to pay these higher and higher rates. And you know that in this city, how hard it is for people to get by.
It's obscene. That little riff you did with the numbers, that was very Bernie-like.
You like that?
You did like the top 20% of the 5% of the white percent. Maybe actually would be better if you made it a little bit more like that. The white of the 5.
I need to work on my Bernie.
Yeah. And then the top 1% had the top 30%.
The top 1%
was the 5%. You won't hear this from Donald Trump. The fucking prick. All right, David, that was great. Thank you. Please get back to your position. Don't knock over any wires while you do it. That's the next move. Oh, I'm sorry, no, I guess I fucked it up. I'll have to sit in the chair all the time. David Griscom. Griscom Economic Minute. If you don't already, follow Griscom and Matt on Twitter.
Full day, bro, and I'll see you again soon.
I'm trying to plug you guys. You give him like a dick drop. Yeah. You have a cool day, bro. All right. Check out all of Griscom's writing. Check out Literary Hangover, and patronize yourselves, because goddamn, guys, we are weeks away from 2,000 patrons and that fucking food bucket challenge. It's gonna be brutal. Raygon reminded me of that the other day. Joining us now, I don't even know, do we even need to take a break? Not really. Bree, just come up. Yeah, give her some music. Nice. Come around this way. Come around, yeah, you're good. That is the classic, the Law and Order Justice Hammer. Indeed. Yes.
Well, I'm no fan of the heroes of that show.
I am no fan of the heroes of that show either, but I am a fan of that sound drop. And our dope Danarchy music. Briahna Joy Gray, she's a senior politics editor at The Intercept. She's co-host of the SWOTY podcast. She's crew on the Michael Brooks Show. We've missed you, Bree. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
I've missed you as well. Things have changed. We dress Natalie now. We have a full beard now.
I think you might have seen the full beard before.
I feel like a heads up was warranted.
I realized I like to contradict you, Bree, but I want to just say this. It occurred to me that, especially knowing you and your sartorial focus, that I totally should have given you a heads up.
I mean, I just bought a new blazer. It's rad.
Well, you'll be back on again like in a couple of weeks.
All right.
And we'll be both. As a matter of fact, heads up. Next time Bree is on, both of us are in suits. Next time Alona is on, we will both be wearing Adidas tracksuits. So you can plan your programming accordingly. So, Bree, we just had this huge success last Friday. Thanks again to everybody who came to the TMBS live show. We packed the Bell House in Brooklyn.
That's so cool.
I totally wish you were there. It was an amazing event.
I know. Why didn't I go?
I don't know, because I saw on Twitter that instead of being at this amazing show, you were talking to some fucking, like, banker about Social Security or something.
Oh yeah, I had dinner plans.
Not a good use of your time.
I did not realize that your show was happening on Friday, or I absolutely would have gone.
Okay.
Also, that was like a backup date to my dinner plans with my friend that night. So it wasn't
Sad.
like it wasn't that.
Sad. I want to say this is where I'm not into essentialism, but this is where I think generally, although I did actually walk out on a date once because the woman's politics repulsed me that much, but I do think generally women are better about that. Like, men will sit through like, I don't know, yeah, you're right, it's real super complicated. I remember one of my ex-girlfriends, she told me that she literally midway through the date, somehow it became apparent that the guy was a Bush voter, and she straight up got to use the bathroom.
To be clear,
Left.
I didn't
No, you
ghost
wouldn't
on this guy.
You wouldn't do that. That's not your style.
We were
but you
talking,
would. You would
and
be.
it was unpleasant.
Right.
And I was like, "Look, this is unpleasant. We know this is unpleasant. I'm gonna order an Uber. It's very late."
We have some audio from him, actually.
Okay, let's hear. This is found audio from Bree's date instead of going to the TMBS live show.
I was simply trying to fix the culture in many ways.
Did he have a follow-up comment, by the way, in response to Bree saying she was getting an Uber?
It's like being gay in the 1950s.
Who is this?
This is your date.
Okay, all right.
James Damore, the Google guy.
Oh, all right. He would have been a better date.
You know what? No doubt.
We would have had better conversation.
I have no doubt you would have. I have totally been, and it's very funny for me to have such like, is everything okay? Don't make faces like that unless there's like an actual emergency. Is it just like a dumb comment on YouTube?
I'm
Okay.
just dealing with something that's fine.
Okay. So it's funny for me to have the ultra woke take, but like, and I'm all for, actually, the problem with James Damore was that, number one, I loved one union organizer said that if Google was unionized and he got fired for writing a memo, that there would have been a walkout to save his job. And then after they saved his job, they would have caught him after work and beat the shit out of him for being a misogynist. And I was like, that is exactly the best response I heard to the whole thing. He's like, oh yeah, we totally would have kicked his ass for being a complete shithead to his coworkers. But you can't get fired for what you
That's the
say.
way to do it.
Yeah. But the other thing that was fascinating was, I keep mentioning this profile, but it fascinated me. It was like, he is definitely on the spectrum. And like, this is an issue that's occurring in Silicon Valley, and some attorneys are saying, like, there's potential form of employment discrimination that might be at work in some of these cases. And the thing that was funny in this piece was that Damore maybe had a real case, but because he's so infatuated with this right-wing ideology, he couldn't wrap his mind the way that he might actually have potentially been like institutionally victimized in a way. It was fascinating.
Yeah, it's a
kind of
difficult
depressing.
issue. Yeah, as someone who has been in circles with, there's this correlation between people who are very, very bright, who at least by IQ metrics, and also end up on the spectrum.
How seriously are you taking IQ, though?
I mean, whatever, by whatever metric. But
Yeah,
when you're around a lot of
yeah.
high achievers, I feel like oftentimes you end up with people who are, just a little bit on the spectrum. And so I feel like I have a lot of experience in my life, from law school in particular.
I believe that.
And I feel like in some ways that's why I am people say, like, why aren't you more bothered on Twitter? Like, why aren't these people annoying to you? Like, how can you deal with all of these bros? They ask me these questions all the time. And a part of me thinks that it's because I almost don't even notice it anymore. I genuinely don't even notice it. I've worked with people who a lot of people have had trouble with for demore reasons. People who are kind of,
right.
Let's call them alternative thinkers who challenge every, norm
right.
and step on a lot of toes in so doing. Right. And I'm the last person in the office to start crying. I'm like very frequently the only like the broker of peace between factions.
Oh, I believe that. That makes sense. It's certainly a quality that's needed on Twitter. Jesus Christ. We're going to talk more in-depthly about Kamala Harris and touch a little bit on the Green New Deal that AOC announced. Well, along with props due also to Ed Markey. That's a guy who, at least on disarmament and the environment, has accumulated actually a really good record for himself, and it's very cool that he's teaming up with her. But before we get there, and the meat of it will be talking about Harris's record, let's just do a little bit of State of the Union response. And I honestly don't even we have a little bit of sound for the post game, but I just, as like a palate cleanser, this is actually a great throwback clip. We do these throwback clips now, like that amazing clip of that interview with Lula last week. We have to get to more Lula stuff, the latest sort of calumny from Brazil. But this was actually in 1993. I would imagine she's a student at the time. I liked Stacey Abrams' State of the Union response. I'm a Stacey Abrams fan, but I have to say, like a lot of other politicians, this is the Stacey. This was great. Let's take a little bit of a look at Stacey Abrams as a student activist.
Jobs, justice, peace. This is a theme that we've been hearing today over and over again. This is a theme that came out in 1963 when A. Phil Randolph, a trade unionist, came forth to call for a march on Washington, asking for an end to Jim Crow laws, equal access to public education, and civil rights legislation that would change the face of a nation. Today we come before you, walking on the road to jobs, the road to peace, the road to justice, paved with the blood, the sweat, the tears of labor movement people from around the nation. And today, I come to you as a young person, as a young woman, as a young black woman, to ask you to use us, use the young people of the United States of America to pave a road that will last forever, pave a road that will let us become the foot soldiers, let us not have to do this again for our children. We ask you to let us come forth with you, not behind you, not in front of you, but together on that road to jobs, justice, and peace.
I think any reaffirmation of A. Philip Randolph, jobs, justice, and peace is, amazing and important in and of itself. I just wanted to play that because I thought it was great. But what did you think? Let's start with her. Let's go in both directions. So let's start with her. What did you think of her response and how she did?
I thought it was good. I thought it was solid. I think the expectations for the rebuttals are very low.
Right.
I thought that the optics were great with the diverse crowd of people behind her. I thought when you're reading the transcripts of the speeches, as I had to do as I stayed up late trying to cobble together a response before the morning, you can tell when you're reading hers that she's a writer. It like flows in a much more literary way than some of the other speeches. But I will say that only upon rereading was I able to absorb the content of her speech fully. Because of the time restrictions, she only had a little under 10 minutes to talk.
Yeah.
Her approach was to cram a lot in there, to just tackle every issue that she feels like is underserved in Trump's speech and in the political discourse more generally speaking. And that is right and true. There was an argument that approach doesn't necessarily carry the best kind of rhetorical effect or persuasive effect, right? Because, I think that the issue that stood out from her speech was her focus on access to voting, voter disenfranchisement. And that came across because she hit it many times and devoted a significant hunk of her remarks to that. There is an argument that you could have chosen maybe 2 or 3 issues and really nailed those and maybe pared down a little bit of the narrative framing device she used about her father giving her coat to someone who didn't have one, and be a little bit more focused that way. And I I didn't think that when I was watching it. But when I then watched Senator Sanders' speech and I realized how many themes he was able to articulate and the overwhelming feeling of, the over, like a kind of a broader critique of Trump, that Trump was appropriately diagnosing what was wrong in America and offering up all of these false prescriptions. And here are the prescriptions. And the very simple message that a majority of Americans want, these progressive policies, a whole cohort of progressive policies. And the only reason you're not getting them is because of the oligarchy. Like, I was like, oh, he had much more time to talk than Abrams. So understandably, he was able to get to a lot more. But I thought to myself, that is an incredibly powerful theme. And if she had done that coupled with the voting rights issue, then it could have been not just a very competent, really good response, a response that's much better than others where there have been water bottle lipstick challenges, all kinds of things that's happened in recent memory. It could have been the thing that we're all talking about. It could have been so good as to be notable and not just, holding the line.
I agree with that. Do you think, though, that I'm always trying to set a little bit of a template here, because I think that especially people who've come up in 2016 and are sort of moving into politics now, there is this very clear narrative inside Democratic Party and inside just like center left to left politics, which has a lot of truth to it, which is like, it's basically, the progressives verse, right? It's not just Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton. It's, let's really broad. I mean, it's Barbara Lee versus Andrew Cuomo. It's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez versus Nancy Pelosi. It's that very basic dynamic. But I think one of the enormous successes that Bernie Sanders has created is it's not just that he's forced politicians who probably really basically are of the center right to at least pay rhetorical lip service to a broader progressive agenda. It's created room for people like Stacey Abrams, and I don't mean this like at all as a pejorative. It's not my politics, but I would say genuine center left politicians. And it's a type that we haven't seen as much recently because it's like rank corporatists or like robust progressives. So I think that when I saw Abrams' speech, it was actually very clarifying, because it was like, Bernie really does need to speak after this because there's other things that are just going to be hit because of time restraints and also just ideological differences. And on the other hand, if this quality of leadership and this actual genuine center-left politics, which we are going to be in coalition with, that's great. Yeah. Like, that's a real improvement.
Yeah, I want to say that I really, really think that she's one of the best messengers in the game.
100%.
I wrote an article very shortly after I started at The Intercept about some title, something like fetishizing identity. If they fetishize identity politics, it'll be bad for 2020. And the subject was Stacey Abrams, because at the time, all the rhetoric around her was about how she was the identity politics candidate. Stacey Evans was making economic appeals and caring too much about poor white people, and that was the choice. Mm-hmm. It was a race that was reflecting the broad culture divide that was really still roiling at the time between economic anxiety and identity politics, as these things have to be in tension. And what I did was listen to a bunch of her speeches. I'm, no expert. I'm not from Georgia. So I listened to everything I could listen to from both candidates. I watched all the debates. I took copious notes. And I couldn't for the life of me figure out how anybody could come to any other conclusion that the white candidate, Stacey Evans, was actually the identity politics candidate. And Stacey Abrams was the one that was making a broader populist message that was very inclusive of the white public. So she would go on news shows and they would ask her things like, you really aren't that interested in courting whites, aren't you? And Stacey Abrams would go, that's not true. I'm looking for a broad coalition, and you're misidentifying who the rural voter actually is. There are a lot of black rural voters. Right. There are, this is a diverse state, and everybody has space here. Meanwhile, Stacey Evans got in trouble for the thing where her face got faded over Martin Luther King Jr.'s face, and she was, trying to...
I did not hear about that.
Oh, you didn't hear?
That is pretty robust.
She had a commercial.
Do you have like my Malcolm X backdrop? I'm just kidding. Sorry, go ahead. I want to merge my... Yeah.
I just completely believe that we had one of those.
I got lightheaded by that burn. That was really good. All right. So she actually did that.
She said that was a big controversy. She really hit Evans hard on the Hope Scholarship Program, which was kind of coded as a racial issue. So there was a scholarship program disproportionately Black students could take advantage of, or ended up taking advantage of, that Stacey Evans supported basically rolling back. And Evans's justification is that she did so as a compromise. Otherwise, the whole program was going to lose a lot of money. I'm not going to debate the merits of it, but the conversation around it was heavily racialized. It was, was the white candidate defending this program for Black people, and it was Stacey Evans. Sorry,
So
Stacey
Abrams. Oh, okay.
Abrams was the one that was responsible, right? So Evans was hitting that racial point. She talked a lot about how she was from Georgia, but Stacey Abrams was technically from Mississippi, I believe. So she was like, my identity as a Georgian. There were all of these different ways that she was emphasizing her identity when Abrams wasn't. So I want to be really, really clear that she should be someone that we 2020 candidates and anyone else who's interested in succeeding in politics should look to about how to craft a message that speaks broadly to a diverse population, especially one that includes a lot of white people who aren't not going to be as, accepting potentially to some of the kind of like New Englandy liberally rhetoric, like some of the
well, and also just
tougher crowd,
right? And I also wonder, and I mean, I think what she's so great is that she's a real synthesizer, which we saw like in that throwback clip. That really, and you make this point, that really, at the end of the day, is not a contradiction between synthesizing all of these themes, but it also just strikes me. And I was talking about this on Woke Bros with Waz. Actually, we did a really good segment on Kamala Harris last week, which people should definitely listen to. And it's like. And I want you to, like, we're going to get into Kamala Harris pretty in depth now, but it just strikes me that, like, the rhetoric that is so essentialist is not only problematic at times in terms of the issues you identify, but it's also, like, it's literally essentialist. So that if you came to the Jewish community and you said, let's like really stereotype it. Like, Jews are people who live in the New York suburbs and they have multiple degrees and they're affluent and they practice finance, law, or medicine, right?
To be clear, these are not things that I said. He said them.
Oh. and I'm not even setting up a joke. That is a inaccurate stereotype. In fact, if you look at the broad expanse of the Jewish community, there's in fact a lot of poverty in the Jewish community. If you globalize it, there's a lot of the broad sort of distribution of economic and social difference that you have in any community. And so actually I'll keep pushing the analogy. When Joe Lieberman is the vice presidential nominee, there is something just innate of like, okay, a group that is underrepresented, and it's different. There's no doubt a racial difference, but there's just something like, okay, he's the first Jewish nominee for vice president. That's something. But then what does he represent in this community? And what is the context of the community? And I found this really, because when I anecdotally speak to people that I know in the African-American community, the Afro-Caribbean community that represent the expanse of that community economically and educationally, and I'm definitely not, it's not anti-Harris or pro-Bernie, but it is absolutely not this like one-dimensional narrative that media try to appeal, because like normal people doing a smart, sophisticated analysis, they're taking multiple variables in, and they're saying, on one hand, like any right, I'll be done in a second, like any right-thinking person, if you asked me just generically, hey, would you like to see a black woman beat the shit out of Donald Trump in 2020? Of course. I think you'd have to be demented to not want to see that. I thought you were just
going to say generally, not in the context of
I've definitely already made that joke, and much worse. I have pushed the boundaries of how far that joke could be pushed. Yeah, a lot of words like figurative, literal, kill, on and off the field, that type of thing. I know you don't like going that far, so I've not wanted to bring you in it. But that point, but and then on the other hand, a lot of very correct questions about actually, first of all, well, the prosecutor thing raises some eyebrows, and then like, what's her plan on college? What's her plan on, all the things that people have to think about in this way that really undermine that. The narrative, again, it's a problem in terms of broad electoral coalition building, but it's also so essentializing and undermining of real political differences inside fill-in-the-blank community. So anyways, that's my preamble. You wrote a really good piece, A Problem for Kamala Harris. Can a prosecutor become a president in the age of Black Lives Matter? We're going to get to the sound in a few minutes. But I mean, first, kind of, what's your read?
So I think my perspective on her, I have to admit, is informed by the fact that I dated a public defender for the past 3 years. And you know, all his friends were public defenders.
Right.
His roommate was a public defender, and we hung out with all the public defender crew. And I think that there is an extent to which a lot of people who are outside of the legal community, and particularly outside of that community, don't see prosecutors as an arm of law enforcement and as the power behind everything that they dislike about the police and police corruption and violence against particularly marginalized communities. But when your job is to defend particularly those people who are the most vulnerable, who can't afford their own representation, you come face to face with the extent to which they are actually, in some ways, in a lot of ways, more culpable than cops, because cops, their job is to follow up with crime and bring whoever is, you know, who did it in, right? Mm-hmm. Try to find out what happened. It's the prosecutor's job to lock them up. Mm-hmm. And the prosecutor has the discretion to not do so if they don't want to. So we live in a world now where slowly but surely, because of the Black Lives Matter movement, people are increasingly aware that the legal system as it exists is not the way it has to be. So we have figures like Larry Krasner who have completely redefined what it means to be a prosecutor, notably someone who spent his entire career as a public defender, who immediately got into office and started acting like public defenders would want prosecutors to act in the interest of broad substantive fairness. Right. So, you know, Kamala Harris has been portraying herself as a progressive prosecutor, which is something that I feel like is in kind of a bizarre choice in a world where we actually do, for the first time, have progressive prosecutors. And so my question is, understanding what her trajectory is, understanding that she claims to have these super lefty bona fides, that her parents met at Berkeley, and she says, no one had to tell me about police injustice or civil rights. I was born knowing because of my parents, right? She grew up in Berkeley. You know, she went to law school and then made a choice, an informed choice, to become a prosecutor. Now, who does that? I'll tell you who does that.
Tell me who does that.
It's a very common career trajectory for people who want to go into politics.
Right.
So you can graduate from law school and go into a big firm, but you get a lot of brownie points if you have worked in a context where you get a lot of trial experience. Because in big law, you get none. I've never in my life, you know, had a case that actually went to trial. I've never been in a, you know.
Wait for it. The super producer a little slow on this drop. Thank you. Go ahead.
Right.
Yes.
You know, so it's not only that; it's a way to shore up your, you know, your political, you know,
resume.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, people say because she is a black woman, because she's black, because she's a woman, she had to be tough on crime. She had to take the kind of job that would, you know, show that she wasn't going to let her community off the hook, as it were. But that's the problem.
Right. Well, that kind of feeds to what I was saying before, which is like some of the defenses become so profoundly racialized and condescending and invalidating of themselves. Like,
and careerist. It's fundamentally careerist. Like what they're basically saying is for her to get ahead, she had to do this.
Right.
Right. So you're explicitly acknowledging that the whole point here is so she can have a political career. Mm-hmm. She had to be overly punitive to black and brown people and low income people.
Yep. And again, that to me, and I'll just broaden it to, right, it's careerist. And then if you want, look, and then you could defend, like, well, maybe the calculation is she puts herself in a position where she can do the greater good, right? Which obviously I don't buy that, but I'm just saying we're going to talk about that right after we play this clip. But I just want to say, like, the fundamental base of this conversation, though, for me is like I'm willing to consider and be educated on these variables. What I am absolutely not willing to do is not take her seriously as a candidate. Because the irony of so many of these defenses is actually the profound condescension that one of the most prominent politicians in the United States, someone who I would say on a just kind of performance level is the most formidable candidate in terms of, you know, the kind of like charisma and all of that. I mean, look, we're not talking about Obama or Clinton, but this isn't an electrifying field in that way. So she is the best of that quotient in this field. Sure. I have my defense of why I do think Bernie is actually charismatic, but that's a different conversation. So I'm saying this is an enormously formidable candidate, and I'm going to take her record enormously seriously because she could be the Democratic nominee and indeed the president of the United States. And we can have a conversation that it takes into account every single other factor, including the obvious distinct burdens that she has as an African-American woman seeking national office, of course. But any escape, because I've seen the arguments you're putting forward as essentially not only is that case closed in terms of why she did, and now therefore any discussion of her record is somehow innately problematic. Mm-hmm. And then we've really just lost it's like now we're in the Bill Fletcher Jr. like only a whale can critique Moby Dick sort of territory of just like the most absurd, you know, postmodern relativistic.
We're Russian bots. Did you see the Joyanne Reed fiasco?
But trust me, I know you did.
I think the Intercept's going to publish something about this. I think tomorrow. Scoop. But Joyanne Reed on her show earlier this week had this woman on who was making the argument that there are a bunch of people who are being very critical of Kamala and Cory Booker, who have the hashtag ADOS in their handle, which stands for American Descendants of Slaves. So a lot of like Black American descendants of slaves refer to themselves as descendants, things like that. Mm-hmm. And because a bunch of Black Americans are being critical of these two candidates, obviously her argument is that, it's naturally. She says, watch out, if they have ADOS in their handle, it means they're a Russian bot. And what's her name? Angela Rye got on this as well and corroborated it.
I liked Angela Rye, really. I mean, I like the Angela Rye from like 2 CNN clips. It's not a highly informed opinion. That sucks.
Hold my tongue.
No, you can. You actually. Fine. You know what? I have to say, we still have some differences of opinion and a different approach to Twitter, but the last couple of weeks you've bought a lot more space with me in terms of how much you can lay down, because my whole like peacemaking instincts have just been like, really? Are you fucking kidding me?
There's some bizarro world stuff happening. The Bernie giving a speech is racist business.
Yeah.
Like, I thought it was pretty inured to how dumb things could get. That was some next level dumb stuff.
Well, that's actually, I'll just lay this out. I wasn't going to address it, but I look, 2 quick points on that. You could conceivably convince me that if he said, I'm not going to do this because of Stacey Abrams' speech, that might have been a smart, tactical, short-term play. Now, or maybe not. I'm not wedded to that position. But the second thing, I want to go back to this other point. Like, yes, of course, this is distinct, historical, and important. And you know what? I have a huge amount of respect for Stacey Abrams. As first of all, I consider her to be the rightful governor of Georgia. And I think she's an enormously effective frontline American politician. And I think this, like, the subtext of this, like, kindergarten, like, oh, well, I mean, Bernie's going to do his live stream, and then it's all going to be done. To me, and I will say this particularly with white people making that argument, I found that to be the most condescending, patronizing. Like, somehow people need to figure out in these circles, and I'm talking very specifically about liberal white people, how to acknowledge, understand, own all the adjectives, racism and sexism and so on, and also still have like an adult metric for interacting with national leaders.
Yeah.
And
I will say that was just woke white people who were on that bandwagon.
No doubt. But I was amazed. I was literally embarrassed to read tweets like that on behalf of everybody, including most prominently fucking Stacey Abrams.
Yeah. Yeah, especially the when it came out like halfway through the day that Kamala Harris was also going to give a speech. Hers was before, so literally the word upstaging was being used. The way you upstage someone is to precede them. Bernie Sanders' speech didn't overlap with Abrams. It followed. He's given it like 3 years in a row. All of the things that we know to be true, and the fact that people were presented with the evidence that Kamala Harris was doing the same thing but worse, and excused her. Literally, people were writing, "Well, she did hers first, so that makes it better." But why?
Oh wait, I'm sorry.
I don't think so.
There it is.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, it was like gaslighting. It was a rough day on Twitter.
Yeah, I tapped out of that one. But I mean, and also, I think Matt, you maybe I don't want to put you on the spot, but you made this point at least to me, and I'll absorb it if you don't want to take it on too. But like, this is all literally happening on the same day that people are essentially marking Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib for some of the most racialized, attacks on their Israel position, implying they're anti-Semitic, free of any evidence. I mean, this is like you literally at the same moment that all of this nonsense about these speeches is going on, you have an example of two of the most important freshman congresswomen who everybody at least pays lip service to supporting are being harassed in media and by fellow members of Congress while we're doing, Bernie's doing a live stream, obviously, that,
on Facebook.
He's on Facebook. It is finally real, his real, like, he's going to come out and just be like, oh, everybody gets health care and we need a Polish homeland of white people, or whatever other. I mean, it was just, if you bring in Ilhan and Rashida Tlaib into that, it really just completes a picture of like,
yeah, it's a lot of pretextual nonsense, which is the kind of thing that set off the James Damores of the world.
Right. That's right.
He's very wrong, but there is like a weird culture that does exist on the fringes that does not help the case, that does not help the left case. No, definitely. And it's, and people need to be able to, absorb and evolve from those things. So this is another thing that didn't help. This video has gone around a lot, but it needs to. And I think I am very much in a position where I can really attest. There's plenty of clips of plenty of politicians, even ones whom I oppose, who I'm very willing to be like, you know what, whatever. That was the context. That was the time. I'm probably more willing to do that about Kamala Harris than many other people in my political profile, just to be blunt. That being said, and even just coming from an experience of poverty personally, we know over-sentencing. We know attacking sex workers. We know all these huge problems in her record, which I hope you'll elaborate on. There is something profoundly pernicious about looking at a problem like child truancy and thinking that it is a criminal problem and not one of justice and compassion, let alone sort of laughing off criticisms of it. So we will play this clip again.
I would not be standing here were it not for the education I received. And I know many of us will say the same thing. And I believe a child going without an education is tantamount to a crime. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my re-election race. But I said, look, I'm done. This is a serious issue, and I've got a little political capital, and I'm going to spend some of it. And this is what we did. We recognized that in that initiative, as a prosecutor and law enforcement, I have a huge stick. The school district has got a carrot. Let's work in tandem around our collective objective and goal, which is to get those kids in school. So, to that end, on my letterhead, now let me tell you something about my letterhead. When you're the DA of a major city in this country, usually the job comes with a badge. This is creepy. And there is often an artistic rendering of said badge on your stationery. So I sent a letter out on my letterhead to every parent in the school district. outlining the connection that was statistically proven between elementary school truancy, high school dropouts, who will become a victim of crime, and who will become a perpetrator of crime. We sent it out to everyone. A friend of mine actually called me and he said, Kamala, my wife got the letter. She freaked out. She brought all the kids into the living room, held up the letter, said, if you don't go to school, Kamala's going to put you and me in jail. Yes, we achieved intended effect.
And she also, to be clear, I just, Bri, please take over, but I just want to be clear. And this is one of the, I literally got some pendant responses like, well, what if it helped the attendance rate? Which is if that's your response, you are wrong. You're in the wrong moral universe. She also did actually prosecute people.
She did.
So there wasn't just emotional terrorism. There was actual prosecution. But please, Bri.
So my former colleague at The Intercept, Zed Jelani, wrote a piece that argued that it worked. And then my colleague at Current Affairs, Nathan Robinson, wrote a response to that piece that I thought was pretty excellent. That basically drew the comparison to Singapore and said that there are posters on the street that say, if you spit your gum out, you're going to get caned.
And they do that in Singapore, and it works.
It's clean.
It's a very clean place by all accounts.
Clean, well-run authoritarian state.
That's right.
So I mean, I think that's the point there. I mean, the problem is Nathan also wrote in a different article about Kamala Harris that, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And when all you have is the ability to prosecute, you start to look at every problem and think that you can prosecute your way out of it. And it's just really disturbing to look at something like truancy, to profess to have concern for the fact that truant kids will end up in the criminal justice system, the one you have exert power over and authority over, and then decide that your ability to your way to contribute is not going to be to step out of your professional role and think about what you can do, to support legislative initiatives, to bring attention to various causes, to contribute financially, et cetera, but to simply prosecute their parents and brag about your authority as a cop and your badge on the letterhead.
It's so creepy. That's really the only word.
To threaten people into compliance.
Yeah.
To see a family whose kids are struggling to get to school on time and to think that the reason why their parents aren't forcing them to has to do with their parents' negligence and not the fact that low-income parents are often working multiple jobs, aren't able to be there when their kids are going off to school. The kids are going to schools that no sane person would want to step foot in because they're so poorly run and dangerous. To not think of that whole cluster of humanitarian concerns that are driving these impulses, and to assume that it's something about just individual will and something that you can wrest people into is such a cruel and base perception of humanity, and shows such a flat understanding of the social factors that go into an outcome like truancy. That bothers me on many levels. It gives me concerns about who she is as a leader much more broadly than just this narrow issue, which in and of itself is very, very bad.
No, that's a microcosm. That is an issue where you can absolutely arguably say this is a window into a profoundly disturbed moral compass. And I want to say, with criminal justice issues and all that comes with them in terms of race, in terms of economics, in terms of also just our broader, I'll get to that to a second, but I think actual really important values like restoration and compassion. All of the candidates, let's just stipulate, all of these candidates have cast bad votes, including Bernie Sanders. All of them, or most of them, have engaged in, tough on crime discourse. Cory Booker did some very aggressive police maneuvering in Newark. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are, to me, stand out significantly in this category. He wrote the 94 crime bill, which is one of the most massive expansions of the criminal industrial complex in U.S. history, and she prosecuted the fuck out of it. If you take these issues seriously, I don't know how you come back from those two.
It's hard, and I want to be really clear. I am someone who does believe in redemption and rehabilitation, and would create some space for her to reckon substantively with her record.
Yep.
And to talk. If she was out here saying, look, I look back at the decisions I made and I am I cringe at watching that video.
Right.
You know, I thought I had to make compromises that I realize now I didn't have to, and were wrong and weren't worth the outcome. And I am committed to making amends in every way I can if I were to be elected. You know, she might be our candidate, and we might all have to get behind her.
Yep.
And I would have a lot better, easier time voting for her if she reckoned with this in a serious way, just like if Hillary Clinton had reckoned with some of her past, instead of pretending like everything was, you know, sexism, some of which it was, but not everything.
Of course. Right.
It would have been a lot easier to put a lever for her. But, you know, she hasn't. She hasn't, more than she hasn't. There are multiple clips of this nature where she keeps repeating the argument. She says even right there, my staff thought this was controversial. My staff didn't want me to do this. She knows. So people have told her what the implications of this are, and she persists in doing so anyway.
Although I have a skepticism about one part of that clip, because she frames it as the staff is concerned electorally. I don't,
not ethically. That's interesting.
Bullshit. I don't buy that for a second. Even in San Francisco, and I know that, I mean, look, let's be real. San Francisco already at that point had been well gentrified. For most of modern American history, a DA could always bet on running a far right. And in fact, Kamala Harris ran against a real progressive in one of her DA races and attacked them from the authoritarian right on crime. The concern was people who actually worked in that office, if I'm projecting, was of people who actually had some ethical qualms about terrorizing poor families. Not this isn't going to poll well in the Mission District. That is fucking bullshit.
So Li Fong published an article today at around 1 o'clock. I think you should try to pull up the pictures from it if you can, because he went to San Francisco and spent the whole day walking around the city until he found some campaign flyers from that race against Terrence Hallian, I think was his name, the progressive prosecutor that she beat. So Terrence, I know his first name is Terrence. I'm ambivalent about his pronunciation of his last name. Yeah. This is it. Yeah. So he had lowered prosecution rates dramatically. He was funneling all of these kids not into prison, but into rehabilitation drug programs and community service and all this. He was doing exactly what he should have done decades before this new wave of progressive prosecutors. She beat him using flyers like this with, you know, coded Latino at the very least, chest with tattoos across it.
That literally could be a Trump ad. I'm not using hyperbole.
Yes.
That could be a Trump ad.
Yes. If you scroll down to the next one, there's one with a chalk outline. Okay. And if you go to
let me read it for people listening. This one is a chalk outline of a dead body, and it says, an outline for disaster. Which district attorney has ranked last in convictions every year for the last 8 years? The last one is essentially, you know, it's supposed to be, it's some type of photo of a, I mean, it doesn't. It looks like an album cover to me, but it's coded for Latinos, throwing a gang sign, holding a gun. Enough is enough. Murder is up 30%. Skyrocketing rates of youth in jails. Another generation lost to gang violence. Who hears the cry for help? A new voice for justice. Now, the language on that one is actually not so problematic, but the visual is almost Horton-esque.
So if you click through, I think on the second one, you can see the inside of it. So click underneath for the full mailer. Yeah. Oh, okay. So this, it's like the chart of the conviction rates going down, which in a different world you think is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But it just shows you, you know, how intense she was about using this guy's good, admirable record as a selling point for her. In Lee's article, it's very good and gets into a lot of the details of the politics and the things that she says. At one point she says, well, you know, to be clear, I'm no public defender. I mean, she like really goes hard in the paint. And there's some, just read it. I was spellbound.
A lot of handshakes. She was the Patrick Ewing of DAs.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't want to have to go in so hard on her. Like I was very ambivalent about it. When she, you know, she's been the projected, you know, best, you know, number one kind of centrist candidate option since the second Trump was elected. And, you know, I don't have any interest in attacking her particularly, but it's like you scratch the surface and it's just more and more and more of this stuff comes up. And it's getting to a point where I'm seeing, you know, I'm used to being kind of like the lefty black person, right? I'm seeing in like broad mainstream Black Twitter, people are very unhappy with both her and Cory Booker in a way that I find frankly heartening. People are saying things, tweeting, writing in comment sections, things like, we're not falling for this okadoke. You don't,
Right.
I'm not going to be put in this position where you're going to force me to vote for someone like this just because they're Black. You have to do better.
Absolutely, and I also just want to say, I think more broadly, and this kind of somewhat correlates with the Damore conversation earlier. I find it in a culture generally, particularly on the left and in these sort of small social circles, that where there needs to actually be way more of an emphasis on like complexity, restoration, compassion, broader analysis. There is something that's really disturbing about almost like a person, like there's almost like a perfect synergy of like a certain very narrow type of representation with a record that reflects this profoundly punitive, cruel, and discarding of humanity impulse, which we need to be fighting against on all fronts. And I actually love that you added, including for her, because if she was out robustly pivoting her policy, I would be centering that. I'm not saying I would support her. I mean, it's pretty clear that I'm going to support Bernie Sanders because of my politics, but I would have no commitment to relitigating this at all in the same way.
Yep.
And I've actually tried to bend over backwards, even for people that, frankly, if you put a gun to my head, do I really trust that Cory Booker is some great porn again progressive or Christian Gillibrand? No, I don't. But I've given them a lot of space. I think that Tulsi Gabbard's connections to the Hindu far right are like profoundly disturbing. But you know what? She said some great stuff on Venezuela. She's been talking about the earth and peace. And so I'm not that I'm going to stop criticizing her, but like, let's be more, not us personally, but in the sense, Christ-like, like literally, like more space, more forgiveness, more compassion, more reconciliation. But she is not, I mean, in the CNN town hall, she basically was like, look, if you don't like prosecutors, don't vote for me.
Yeah. I liked to think that line was about me. I like to think that she read my article because she says some people just think that all prosecutors are bad. I'm not going to please them.
Yeah, but the problem with that, I mean, it could have been about you, but the problem is we like Larry Krasner.
Right. Well, I'd say that I'd make the distinction
I know,
in the
of course
article.
you do, but even that, I won't let her have that frame.
Yeah.
Because I got doubly pissed. Because, like, first of all, you're totally negating the substance of this question, and secondly, people are working across the country to elect, I mean, there's a slew of people getting elected to that position who want to, like, actually generate actual justice and well-being. So you're not only disingenuously brushing off your record, you're undermining many candidates, including, by the way, if we want to, many women of color candidates, in fact. So that really is. That's the full circle of the problem. Of course, it would be valid to talk about if she had changed. Yeah. But she hasn't.
Yeah. And to the point about prosecutors that I mentioned earlier, I do want to say that when I was in law school, one of the most impactful kind of seminars that I went to was this progressive prosecutor panel, and it was put on by the Black Student Association. And at this panel, they had two prosecutors. One was a younger guy, currently a prosecutor, and an older guy who had been a prosecutor and then quit. The young guy went first and gave the pro prosecutor pitch. I'm going to work from the inside. You need good people there. If I'm not there as a Black man to hold people accountable, then who else is going to do it? I heard him talk, and 22-year-old me said, "Oh, fantastic. Obviously, you have to work from the inside. Anybody who doesn't believe that is incredibly cynical and blah, blah, blah." Then the second guy spoke. And holy shit, if he didn't change my mind. He told this story, and I cite him in my piece. I wanted to talk to him, but I wasn't able to get him in time. He told a story about how he was standing in court, having brought a case against a Black man who was from the same neighborhood as he was, similar age, could have been him in a different world. And how there was this, the subtext, I think, of his co-counsel was that he was being pointed to as the example of how you can make it. And that this guy's race, I think it was during sentencing, how this guy's race and class background and all those kinds of things wasn't an excuse for what he had done. And in that moment, he realized, and this is 10 years since I heard this story, and I don't want to misrepresent him at all, but this my recollection of it is that he said, like, I realized in that moment how much my very presence is used to pretend that the system is fundamentally fair and sound.
Yep.
And there is that way, like, you know, I had a class with Lonnie Guinier, and she made this argument right after Barack Obama was elected. I was a 1L in law school, and I remember thinking, oh, that's so cynical, that, oh, I shouldn't be happy about Barack Obama because he's just making everybody think that race is okay, like that the system is okay.
Right.
But over time, it became increasingly clear to me, my perspective is very much that when you have a system that is so fundamentally unjust, where people's literal lives are at stake, we can't sit here playing games like, I'm going to do a little bit. Like, and I don't mean to say that everyone's a prosecutor. One of my best friend's husband's a prosecutor. It's a little dicey right now. Yes. I'm not saying that everyone has the moral weight of everything that's wrong in the criminal justice system on their shoulders, but particularly when you're in there for a career and you know that you're so junior that you're not going to be able to exert any influence, you don't have prosecutorial discretion. Right. You are literally the arm of the system that you know is fundamentally unjust. That's what you're signing up for. And I don't think that we should wave away the ethical implications of doing so. There's ethical implications of being at the bottom where you can't really help very much. And if you're at the top and you're not doing what you're supposed to do, if you're not being Larry Krasner, then there are overwhelming ethical implications for you as well. And that's the slot that Kamala Harris is in.
Yeah, I don't. And then I have to say, you know, and this is where, again, I would talk about this regardless because it is important. But when you couple opting not to prosecute Steve Mnuchin with we're going to arrest people for truancy, yep, you are never going to convince me.
Yep. And her responses on that have been really inadequate as well.
Right.
You know, the attitude that she feels like she doesn't have to engage. It was such a thoughtful question she got at the CNN town hall.
Very respectful, very thoughtful.
And that she completely sidestepped it. You know, it was like it was disrespectful to all of us who have an ethical concern that at very least I would hope that she shared. Even if she was a craven careerist, if I just knew that at bottom, this is how I feel about Cory Booker. Cory Booker is a trip and a half. But I think
cornball.
A cornball. Sure, but I and maybe I'm wrong and naive, but my sense of him is that if he were born in 1985 instead of 1972 or whatever, if he was coming up in the Ocasio-Cortez generation and today when being a progressive
are you kidding me?
Is actually the politically expedient thing to do.
He would be in Caracas having a hunger strike right now.
He would love it. He would be happy to be able to be the good guy.
Right.
Like he wants to be the good guy so desperately.
I think that's true. I think that's true.
And he thought he had to make whatever compromises, take the pharma money, whatever. It's not good. It's not an excuse. But I believe in his heart, he wants to be the good guy. When I hear Kamala Harris like snickering like she just did, I don't know what to make of that.
Right. No, it's profoundly disturbing. And again, it's like, you know, the last thing I'll put in this is like when you read The Audacity of Hope, you know, Barack Obama, you know, he put some gestures towards restorative justice, but he makes very clear that he supports the death penalty. I mean, it's totally like, and in very Obama, like, I think that if you hurt a child, we ought to be able to mete out the ultimate justice.
It's always the child.
Always the child.
That. Let's talk about child predators and murderers.
Always the worst, most, right. Exactly.
80% of people in jail in California are there for, like,
shoplifting on a third strike.
It's like people are in there for misdemeanors. It's like truancy.
Truancy, marijuana, shoplifting. And also, frankly, other things that are more serious that we still need to restore people from. But but that being said, I just like Barack Obama. If you write and you signify that as like, I'm going to go for being not only, you know, the first African-American president and somebody who's clearly very kind of, you know, ethereal and worldly, like you can give me all of the political cases all day and it could still be wrong, but I can hear it is distinct from you literally prosecuted people. I mean, that's just where I'm stuck. Yeah. Because if you come at me politically, I have a lot of time for machinations and maneuvers, but I don't have a lot of time for, you know, arguing to uphold a conviction that the judge tells you should throw out. I don't have a lot of time for, you know, arguing against repealing the death penalty. I don't have a lot of time for defending the three strikes laws, which is a national disgrace, which was implemented by Governor Wilson, who's a prototype for Trump. In some respects, some of the things we're seeing in the United States today writ large were previewed in California in the mid-90s. I can't do it.
It's not going to go away. And for her own best interest, you know, I have another piece. I'm going to sound like I'm just hitting her all the time in these pieces. I wrote this piece in like November and it just didn't get published. It's coming out now after some revisions. But when I write, I want it to be a call to do better.
Right.
It's not because I want to condemn her. I'm not saying I'm going to vote for her, but I want her to be the best version of a candidate she can be because we might end up with her.
Absolutely.
You know?
No doubt.
And as a human being, I just want her to be her best self. And I don't think it's helping her case politically, strategically, to not engage with these incredibly substantive issues, especially when one of your biggest assets is your so-called appeal to the Black community. This ain't it.
Right. Right. All right, folks. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the post game. We're going to talk about AOC's Green New Deal. And then, of course, we're going to put Nancy Pelosi in the gulag. I got to say, that was definitely going to happen because, of course. But it's very rare you get a Joy direct request to put somebody in the gulag. That was a texted request from our esteemed guest tonight. And we are not going to disappoint her. We have got a bunch of other sound to get to. We're going to have fun, of course. We're going to take your Discord questions and so on. Become a patron today. It's time. We're going to get to that 2,000 goal soon. Patreon.com/TMBS. We packed the Bell House, and next week there's news about another live show. Next week, Tuesday, Mark Blythe is the guest. Because we're off the following week, we're going to do a Friday show with the fellas, and I think Big Waz is going to call in. So join today, patreon.com/TMBS. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, David. Thank you, David. Thank you, Forrest. And, of course, Jeff Halper, and, of course, Briahna Joy Gray, the great returning Bri. Thanks each and every one of you. We'll see you soon.